a single cork, holding more than wine inside. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Comment where you're tuning in from. Your words keep this mystery family alive. I always love reading them. Let's begin. It was one of those lazy afternoons at the brownstone when the sunlight filtered through the curtains just so, making everything look slightly hazy and distant. Not a sound outside except for the occasional hum of a passing car, and certainly no one expected the sort of disturbance that was about to unfold. Nero Wolfe sat in his chair as usual, surrounded by a small mountain of books and papers. He was as stationary as a statue, his broad, immovable form a perfect counterpoint to the quiet chaos of New York outside. I, Archie Goodwin, was reading the paper, occasionally tossing in a remark or two, nothing that could pull Wolfe's attention away from his current intellectual pursuits. That was, until the doorbell rang. "Archie," Wolfe's voice came, low and deep, as he didn't even bother to turn his head. "You may attend to that." "Sure thing, boss," I said, standing up and stretching. It was too early for any real excitement, so I figured this would be another one of those uneventful visits from the usual riffraff. I opened the door to find a man who looked like he'd just stepped out of a detective novel. A little too stiff, too well-groomed, the type of guy who orders his suit with the same precision Wolfe applies to his meals. The man's gaze flicked over me, then to the interior of the brownstone, and I saw him take a breath, like he wasn't sure if he should be in such close quarters with a genius of Wolfe's caliber. "Yes?" I asked, my usual cheeriness nothing more than a mask for my curiosity. "I'm here to see Mr. Nero Wolfe," the man said, his voice a bit shaky. "That's why you're here, right?" I said, stepping aside to let him in. "Come in, Wolfe's expecting you." The man walked into the brownstone, glancing around with barely disguised awe. I led him to the sitting room, where Wolfe was sitting, as always, in his chair. He didn't move, didn't greet the visitor. But I knew Wolfe would be paying attention, every minute detail, every shift in the air. "Mr. Wolfe, I presume?" the man asked, now addressing Wolfe directly, his voice tight. Wolfe's response was a single, clipped word. "Yes." "Mr. Wolfe, I have a problem. A very delicate problem," the man said, pulling a small velvet pouch from his coat pocket. He set it carefully on the table in front of Wolfe. Wolfe raised one eyebrow. "Go on." The man hesitated before continuing, clearly uncomfortable with something he hadn't yet revealed. "I need you to find something very small and very important." He opened the pouch with a flick of his wrist, revealing a wine cork. Not just any cork, mind you, but a cork that looked slightly out of place, etched with symbols, its surface more intricate than any cork I'd ever seen. Wolfe, for the first time, moved, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied the object. His fingers twitched ever so slightly, but there was no other sign of interest. "I take it this is the object of your request?" Wolfe asked, still not moving from his chair. The man nodded. "I need it found. I don't know who has it, but I do know it's dangerous." "Dangerous, you say?" I interjected, leaning against the wall, already bored with this guy's mystery. "It's a wine cork, pal. What's so dangerous about it?" The man looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. "You don't understand. This cork, it holds the key to something far larger than you imagine. It's not just a cork, it's a message, and whoever has it has power." At that, Wolfe's expression changed, ever so slightly. He didn't move a muscle, but I saw the tiniest flicker of something. Interest, maybe. But he wouldn't reveal anything just yet. "You've come to the right place, Mr. Wolfe's words trailed off, waiting for the man's name. "Thompson," the man said, almost as if the word were a relief to him. "Reginald Thompson." "Very well, Mr. Thompson," Wolfe said, his voice settling into that calm, implacable tone I knew all too well. I will take your case. But first, I must know everything about this cork. Every detail, every encounter, the slightest deviation in its history may prove crucial. Thompson took a breath, clearly not ready to unload all of his secrets, but resigned to the fact that Wolfe wouldn't let him go without giving up something. It's been in my family for generations. But a few weeks ago, someone took it. I don't know who, but I suspect a former associate, a man by the name of Burke. He and I had a falling out over a business matter. He wanted something from me, something tied to the cork, and when I refused, he vanished. I'm certain he's the one behind it. So this Burke, I piped up, is he someone who, say, enjoys a glass of wine now and then? Perhaps enough to want a cork that's got more going on than it should? Thompson frowned. I don't know. I'm not sure what Burke wants, but I'm certain the cork is more than just a collectible. It's linked to something far more dangerous. Wolfe sat back, his fingers steepled under his chin. A cork, he mused, as though the mere idea of a dangerous cork were the most amusing thing he had ever heard. Very well. I will begin by finding this Burke and uncovering what makes this cork so dangerous. You may leave it in my hands, Mr. Thompson. But remember, when a matter is of great importance, it is never solved by small means. Thompson nodded, though he still seemed unsure of Wolfe's capacity for handling such a strange case. Without another word, he stood, exited the room, and left the brownstone in the same eerie silence it had before. I turned to Wolfe, who hadn't moved an inch. So, boss, I said, what's the deal with a cork that's so dangerous? And why do I have the feeling we're not going to be sitting around drinking wine while we solve this? Wolfe's eyes flicked toward me, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. But he said nothing. Not yet. This, he said finally, will require more than simple observation, Archie. It will require strategy. And I do believe, my friend, that strategy is where we shall begin. And so it began, the quiet, meticulous unraveling of the mystery that had just arrived at the brownstone. A cork, a symbol, and a case that would soon prove to be far more complicated and dangerous than I ever could have imagined. We spent the next few hours in our usual routine, the silence of the brownstone punctuated only by the occasional clink of glass or the murmur of my voice as I made small talk. Wolfe, as ever, was locked away in his study, an island of stillness amid the whirl of New York. I knew better than to disturb him when he was in one of his deep, contemplative moods, especially after a strange case like this one. But curiosity gnawed at me. The idea of a wine cork that could hold such importance was absurd, even by Wolfe's standards, and the more I thought about it, the more questions piled up. What was it about this cork? What made it so significant? And why had Thompson come to Wolfe instead of a simple private investigator? I had my suspicions, of course. Thompson's behavior, his unwillingness to divulge too much, told me more than he thought. But Wolfe hadn't uttered a word on the matter yet, and that in itself was unusual. He usually offered some cryptic observation or a slice of his razor-sharp analysis, but this time there was nothing. I leaned against the wall in the study, flipping through a book on rare wines. Nothing too thrilling, but I was trying to find some connection, some clue to the cork's real significance. When the door opened behind me, I turned, expecting to find Wolfe, but it was Saul Panzer, Wolfe's most trusted operative. "Good evening, Archie," Saul said, his gravelly voice low as always. "What's the good word, Saul?" I asked, rising from my seat. "Anything on that Burke guy?" Saul shook his head. "Not yet. But there's something more to this than you realize." I gave him a questioning look. "What's that supposed to mean?" He didn't answer immediately, his eyes flicking toward the study door as if to make sure Wolfe wasn't within earshot. He leaned in slightly. I've been checking out Thompson, and I think we're missing something. You've met his type before. Polished, a little too smooth. But there's something off about him. He's hiding something, Archie. This cork. He stopped, glancing around again before speaking in a whisper. It's not just a cork. It's a key. A key to something. Big, I felt a sudden weight in the air, like the room itself was holding its breath. A key to what? Saul's expression darkened. I'm not sure yet. But it has to do with a network. Something involving several high-profile individuals. People who wouldn't be caught dead with a cork like that. They're the kind of people who have something to lose. A lot to lose. I could feel the gears in my head start turning. So you're saying that Cork is tied to some kind of blackmail scheme? Or a deal gone wrong? It's bigger than that, Saul replied. It's a symbol. A signal of some sort. Whoever controls it holds leverage over people who have no idea they're being controlled, but there's someone watching it. Someone who's willing to kill for it. I digested this in silence, trying to piece together the implications. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a petty dispute. It was something far more dangerous. I had a suspicion, though, that it wasn't just Burke who had his eye on the cork. There was someone else, someone more powerful, pulling strings from the shadows. Where does Wolfe stand on all this? I asked. Saul shrugged. Wolfe's keeping his cards close to his chest. But he knows more than he's letting on. He always does. Before I could respond, the sound of Wolfe's voice rang out from his study. Archie. Saul. We both turned, and I could tell from the tone of his voice that the time had come to confront the mystery head on. I followed Saul down the hall and into the study, where Wolfe was sitting, as composed as ever. His eyes were narrowed slightly, his hands folded neatly in his lap, and there was an air of calculation about him that suggested he had already deduced more than either Saul or I had pieced together. I've been thinking, Wolfe said, his voice level but unmistakably focused. About Thompson's case, about the cork, and about our so-called Burke. You've reached a conclusion already? I asked, incredulous. Of course, Wolfe replied. The cork, as Mr. Thompson mentioned, is important, though not in the way he seems to think. It is not merely a symbol of power, but of access. It's not the cork itself that holds the leverage, but rather the person who controls it. And that person, my dear Archie, is not Mr. Thompson. Saul and I exchanged a glance, but I kept my attention fixed on Wolfe. He was never one to explain himself in a hurry, but when he did, it was always worth the wait. I've been doing some thinking as well, Wolfe continued, his gaze flicking to me, then back to Saul. And I believe I have an understanding of where this case is heading. Burke may be part of it, but he is a pawn in a much larger game. Someone has been using him as a distraction, someone who knows how to manipulate others without lifting a finger. I could feel the tension in the air intensify. Who's behind it? Then? I asked, already sensing that Wolfe was about to drop a bombshell. Wolfe's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. Someone who has not yet made their move, but will soon enough. Someone very close to our client, Mr. Thompson. Someone who has the most to gain from controlling the cork. Saul's brow furrowed. Are you suggesting that Thompson is involved? Wolfe raised a hand. No, not directly. But I suspect he is being used. It's a game of misdirection, gentlemen, and we've been playing right into it. I felt a shiver run down my spine. If Wolfe was right, this was far more than I'd bargained for. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was still too blurry to make out clearly. This game, Wolfe said, his voice becoming more pointed, will soon reveal its players. And when it does, we will be prepared. With that, Wolfe leaned back in his chair, his hands resting on the arms, a quiet confidence radiating from him. It was clear now. The game was afoot, and we were just beginning to see the first moves. But who was making them and why? That, as always, would require a mind like Wolfe's to unravel. As I stood there, lost in thought, I couldn't help but wonder how long it would take before the next move came, and what it would cost us. The following morning, I was already at my desk, nursing a cup of coffee, when Saul arrived. His face was grim, which wasn't unusual for him, but this time there was something more to his expression, an underlying urgency. "Archie," he said, his voice low, "I've got something." "It's not much, but it's a lead." I stood up, setting my coffee aside. "What's going on, Saul?" "More on Burke." Saul nodded, eyes narrowing. "Not exactly. But it's tied to him. I've been digging around, and it turns out Burke's been seen around a place called the Archive, a wine cellar and auction house off Canal Street. Doesn't sound like a place he'd usually frequent, but it's worth checking out. I think it's connected to the Cork." I grabbed my coat without a word, and we made our way out into the crisp New York morning. The Archive was one of those places that felt as though it had always existed, hidden behind layers of history and dust. It wasn't the sort of spot you stumbled upon by accident, unless, of course, you were looking for something or someone. We entered through an unmarked door into a dimly lit hallway that smelled faintly of oak and aged paper. Saul and I made our way toward the back, where an old, creaky elevator stood. The operator, a silent man in a suit who seemed entirely out of place in a world that had moved past him, gave us a curt nod as he slid open the cage doors. The elevator groaned as it descended. We reached the cellar level after what seemed like an eternity, and as the doors opened, we were greeted by rows upon rows of rare wines and fine liquors. But that wasn't what caught my attention. A man stood at the far end, inspecting a collection of bottles. He was tall, with sharp features and a look of intense concentration. "Burke." Before I could make a move, Saul whispered, "He's not alone." I glanced around quickly, realizing we weren't the only ones in the cellar. There were two others standing near a set of shelves, their backs turned. The air felt heavy, the quietness stretching into something more oppressive. I motioned for Saul to hang back and stepped forward, trying to keep my presence as unnoticed as possible. Burke was speaking in low tones to one of the figures. Though I couldn't hear the words, his hand gestured toward a shelf full of bottles. When the man he was speaking to leaned in closer, his eyes flicked over to the cork on the shelf, which caught the light in a way that made it gleam like something important. The situation was becoming clearer, but not clear enough. The cork. It wasn't just some forgotten object lost in a personal dispute. It was a key to something far more hidden, something involving Burke and the people who would stop at nothing to obtain it. I watched as Burke made his way to a locked cabinet at the far side of the room, accompanied by the second man. He took a key from his pocket, one that looked far too intricate for an ordinary wine cellar, and unlocked the door. They opened it slowly, revealing something that made my breath catch. A small, wooden box, its surface worn and marked with intricate carvings. The cork wasn't just part of a small-time scam. It was part of something much larger, tied to people who knew how to work in the shadows. I wanted to make my move then and there, to confront Burke, but Saul caught my arm, pulling me back. "Not yet. We don't have the full picture." I nodded, knowing he was right. As much as I wanted to rush in, I couldn't risk missing a crucial detail, and Wolfe would never approve of hasty action. We had to be patient. Just a little longer. We stepped back, finding cover behind a stack of barrels. From there, we watched as Burke and his accomplice pulled something out of the box. I couldn't make out exactly what it was from this distance, but it was small, glinting in the low light. The object seemed to pulse with significance, and I felt my heart rate quicken. "We've got to get that box," Saul murmured, his eyes tracking the movements of the men. But we couldn't act yet. Not when we still didn't understand how the pieces fit together. Who was Burke really working for? Who else had a stake in this cork and the box it led to? These were questions that couldn't be answered with a single reckless move. Suddenly, the door at the far end of the cellar opened, and another figure entered. This one was familiar. Reginald Thompson. I froze, my stomach dropping. What the hell was he doing here? He walked toward Burke, his hands clasped behind his back, his movement stiff but purposeful. He was in deep, deeper than I'd realized. This wasn't just about the cork anymore. It wasn't just about Thompson being the victim. It was clear he had known exactly what he was getting into. I watched as Thompson exchanged words with Burke, the conversation just low enough to be unintelligible from our hiding spot. But the glance they shared and the way Thompson's hand hovered near his coat pocket told me everything I needed to know. Thompson wasn't just involved, he was a participant in whatever game this was. "Now we have a problem," Saul muttered. "He's in on it." I had no doubt that Wolfe had already suspected as much, but seeing it firsthand made it far more real. Reginald Thompson had played us all, and we were about to find out just how deep this conspiracy ran. We stayed hidden, watching as the deal was struck, as Burke handed over the box to Thompson. It was as if the final act of a play had begun, the pieces falling into place, one after another. We had no choice but to watch it unfold, knowing that the moment to act would come soon, but only when we had the full picture. And then, as the last figure left the cellar, we made our move. The cork was closer than ever, but so were the dangers. Wolfe had known it would be this way. The quiet unraveling of a mystery was always the calm before the storm. As Saul and I slipped out of the archive, our minds were racing, but we kept our pace deliberate, as though we hadn't just witnessed a deal that seemed to promise chaos. The knowledge that Thompson was involved, that he had been working in tandem with Burke, added another layer of complexity to the case. What was his ultimate play? And how did that box, and whatever it contained, tie into the cork? "Saul," I muttered, "what's in that box? What do you think it really is?" Saul's eyes remained fixed ahead, but his voice was low and thoughtful. "I don't know yet, but it's clear that Thompson's not as innocent as he lets on. This thing, it's bigger than we thought. Whoever's behind this has a long reach, and they're willing to play dirty." I couldn't agree more. Everything about this felt like we were being led down a carefully prepared path, one where every step we took seemed like it was planned out for us. But by whom? By the time we reached the brownstone, I had half a dozen theories spinning in my head. Each one seemed more improbable than the last, but all of them pointed toward one undeniable truth. There was something far more valuable than a simple cork at stake. When we walked through the door of the brownstone, I was expecting Wolfe to be in his usual chair, deep in thought. Instead, he was standing by the window, his back to us, staring out into the street. There was an air of quiet intensity about him, a concentration that told me he'd already begun unraveling the threads we had just started pulling. "Well," Wolfe's voice cut through the silence before I could say a word. "Did you learn anything of consequence?" I glanced at Saul, then nodded. "Thompson's more involved than he's letting on. He's been meeting with Burke, and they're working together. Something big is happening, Wolfe. This isn't just about the cork anymore." Wolfe turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. I suspected as much. But what exactly does this box contain, and what is its connection to the cork? Burke was looking at it in the archive, I explained, my voice steady despite the growing tension. It was locked in a cabinet, but from the way they handled it, it was something important. They were all over it like it was the key to some treasure, or worse, some sort of weapon. "Weapon," Wolfe repeated the word, his expression unchanged. "Interesting. A weapon in the form of a cork and a box. This case becomes more absurd by the hour." "Maybe not," Saul chimed in, his tone heavy, "but I think we've only seen the surface. Whoever controls this cork, this box, they have leverage, And not just over Thompson or Burke. There's someone else pulling the strings. Wolfe gave Saul a steady, penetrating look. Indeed, and I believe we're about to discover who that is. I took a step forward, my eyes locked on Wolfe. You have an idea, don't you? Who's behind all this? I've suspected for some time, Wolfe said, the faintest flicker of recognition crossing his face. But now, with the new developments, I'm certain. I'll need a few hours to prepare. I suggest you both be ready for what's coming next. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean by that? Wolfe's lips curled into the smallest of smiles. I'm about to bring our mystery to its conclusion, Archie. And when I do, I will need you to be ready. This is not a game, and these people do not play by any rules we are accustomed to. I felt a thrill of anticipation run through me. Wolfe's confidence was never misplaced, but I could tell that this case was far different from the usual. The stakes were higher, the players were more dangerous, and the web we were entangled in was more intricate than anything we'd faced before. Saul and I spent the next few hours in silence, each of us reflecting on the pieces we had so far. The cork, the box, Burke, Thompson, and then the whisper of someone else in the background, a person we hadn't yet seen. Whoever it was, they were the key to solving this mystery, and Wolfe was the only one who could make the connection. As evening descended and the brownstone's quiet enveloped us once more, Wolfe finally stood. He motioned for Saul and me to follow him into his study. I had no idea what he had planned, but I could feel the tension in the air like a live wire. Once we were inside, Wolfe began speaking in his calm, deliberate manner. The cork is not just a token. It is a piece in a much larger game, one that involves not only wealth and power, but influence. It's a message, a signature. The person behind this game is someone who has already calculated every move, every possible outcome. I watched him closely, waiting for the revelation. Wolfe's mind worked at a different pace, and he often saw patterns where others saw only chaos. The box, Wolfe continued, contains something that ties all of this together. Not just a token of power, but an actual claim. What I suspect is that the cork, the box, and the individuals involved are all part of a much larger scheme. A scheme designed to shift the balance of power, using leverage and manipulation to control individuals at the highest levels. My heart skipped a beat. You're saying that this isn't just about Burke or Thompson. It's about a power play, one that involves people in positions of real influence. Exactly, Wolfe replied, his gaze sharp. And I believe the person behind it is someone who has been hiding in plain sight, someone who has orchestrated this entire charade from the shadows. But no more. We are going to expose them. I could feel the pieces beginning to fall into place. The game was nearing its end, and Wolfe was preparing to deliver the final blow. All we had to do now was wait for the moment he decided was right to strike. And when he did, we would uncover the mastermind behind it all. But first, Wolfe had one last move to make, and I had no doubt that it would be a masterstroke. As the hours wore on, the tension in the brownstone only grew heavier. Wolfe was deep in thought, his mind already working through every possibility, every angle, while Saul and I kept to our respective corners, waiting for the next move. Wolfe had his methods, and when he decided it was time to act, we'd be ready. But there was a palpable sense of quiet urgency in the air, as though everything was teetering on the edge of revelation. At exactly 8:45 p.m., Wolfe spoke, breaking the silence like a sharp crack in the stillness. Archie, Saul, it's time. I straightened in my chair, my pulse quickening. Wolfe's calm, collected demeanor never failed to make me feel that a major shift was about to occur. I shot a glance at Saul, who, like me, had been waiting for this moment. Neither of us knew exactly what Wolfe had in mind, but we trusted him implicitly. He wouldn't lead us into something we couldn't handle. We followed Wolfe down to the main floor where he stopped at the desk and made a few quiet phone calls. His voice, always measured, gave nothing away. The calls were brief, cryptic, and without elaboration. The pieces of the puzzle were now falling into place, but Wolfe wasn't ready to share his conclusions yet. I'd learned long ago that he often kept his cards close until he was certain the time was right. "Prepare yourselves," Wolfe said after he finished the last call. "We will be meeting our suspects shortly. It's time to see who has been playing the game and to reveal the truth behind this cork and the box." Saul nodded, his face unreadable, but his posture taut with anticipation. I couldn't help but feel the same way. The past few days had been a slow unraveling, a careful study of the people involved. We knew who had played their part, and we knew that Wolfe, as always, would have the final say. By the time we arrived at the designated location, a well-lit, upscale restaurant on the Upper East Side, everything was set. Wolfe had arranged for Thompson, Burke, and their respective associates to meet in the private dining room. The atmosphere in the restaurant was a strange mix of opulence and tension, and I could feel the eyes of the other diners tracking our movements as we entered the room. The guests were already seated, but the moment they saw Wolfe, there was an almost imperceptible shift in the air. Burke was there, his usual smugness replaced with a subtle wariness. Thompson, standing near the window, looked like he was still calculating the next move, though it was clear he wasn't entirely in control. The moment Wolfe stepped into the room, everyone fell silent. Even Burke, who had been speaking casually, stopped mid-sentence as though caught in the act of doing something he shouldn't. Wolfe's presence had that effect on people, quiet, commanding, unsettling. He didn't need to speak right away. His mere entrance was enough to put everyone on edge. "I trust everyone is comfortable?" Wolfe asked, his voice the picture of politeness. "I suggest we make this brief, gentlemen, as I have no patience for unnecessary theatrics." Saul and I remained standing by the door, waiting for Wolfe to take the lead. I could sense that the final reveal was coming, the culmination of everything we had discovered. Wolfe didn't waste time with pleasantries. He got straight to the point. "Mr. Thompson," Wolfe began, his tone cool, "you've played a part in this drama, but you are not its true mastermind. I suspect you've been used as a pawn, perhaps without even realizing it. You've been led to believe you were in control, but you were never the one pulling the strings." Thompson's face tightened, but he didn't interrupt. He was smart enough to know when he was being maneuvered, though I had no doubt he hadn't expected Wolfe to be the one who would turn the tables. "I've been involved in some dealings, yes," Thompson admitted, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "But I didn't know." "I know," Wolfe interjected. "You didn't know. But you should have. You should have seen that the cork you've been chasing was never about your business dealings or your petty squabbles. It was about something far greater, something that involves people who are used to controlling from the shadows." I could see the pieces click into place for Thompson. His hands clenched, but he was still too cautious to lash out. The stakes were too high now. "And you, Mr. Burke," Wolfe continued, turning to the other man, "you've been the muscle in all of this. The one with the connections, the one who's kept an eye on all the players. But you were never the mastermind either. You've been serving someone else." Burke's lips curled into a sneer, but he didn't respond. It was clear now. Burke had known he was a pawn, but he had played his part because the rewards were too great to pass up. Wolfe's eyes scanned the room, focusing on each of them in turn. "All of you, caught in a game you don't fully understand. But I understand it. I understand it perfectly." A heavy silence hung in the air as Wolfe's words sunk in. I could see that Burke, Thompson, and the others were beginning to realize just how much they had underestimated Wolfe. They had thought they were dealing with a simple case, something they could control, but they had miscalculated. "This is where the game ends," Wolfe said, his voice like ice. "The cork, the box, and everything tied to it have a purpose. And the person behind it all has been hiding in plain sight, watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. I believe that moment has arrived. The tension in the room was palpable now. Every eye was on Wolfe, waiting for the final piece of the puzzle to fall into place. And when Wolfe finally spoke, his words were like the last domino in a perfectly arranged line, waiting to topple everything. "The true mastermind," he said slowly, "is none other than your associate, Mr. Larkin. The man who has been pulling the strings from the very beginning, and the one who stands to gain everything." I watched as the others reacted. Thompson's face turned pale, and even Burke seemed taken aback. Larkin, one of the last people anyone had suspected, had been right under their noses, orchestrating everything with a calm, invisible hand. Wolfe had done it again. And now, with everything laid bare, there was nothing left for them to do but face the consequences of their actions. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of Wolfe's words hanging in the air like an oppressive fog. Thompson's eyes flickered with disbelief, and even Burke seemed unnerved. But it was clear from their expressions that they had not expected Wolfe's revelation. Their gaze shifted from Wolfe to each other, uncertainty creeping into their faces. None of them had considered Larkin to be the mastermind behind the whole scheme, but the pieces Wolfe had laid out left no room for doubt. Burke, his bravado faltering, was the first to recover. "Larkin?" he growled, his voice low. "That's ridiculous." "What makes you so sure?" Wolfe's lips curled into a slight smile, the barest hint of triumph in his expression. "I've had my suspicions for some time. Larkin is the one who benefits the most from all of this. You, Mr. Burke, were merely a tool to ensure that the cork made its way into Thompson's possession, where it could be used as leverage. And you, Mr. Thompson," Wolfe continued, "were the perfect pawn. So eager to play the game, so ready to believe you were the one in control." I stepped forward, my own curiosity piqued. "But why? What's so important about the cork, and what does Larkin stand to gain?" Wolfe's gaze shifted to me, his eyes sharp. "The cork is not just a piece of wood, Archie. It's symbolic, a marker of ownership over something far more valuable. What Larkin has been working to control is a network, one that spans across industries and individuals who think they are untouchable. The cork is a signal, a message to those who know how to read it." I watched as Burke's expression shifted from disbelief to understanding, and then to something darker. "Larkin's been manipulating us," Burke muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "Using us like puppets." "Exactly," Wolfe said, his voice cool and commanding. "Larkin never cared about the cork. It's not the cork itself that has value, it's the network it represents, and the people within that network who, until now, have been safely hidden behind the shadows." Thompson's face had turned ashen. "But I never knew any of this. I thought I was just doing business, protecting my own interests." "Your interests were never yours to protect," Wolfe said, his tone final. "Larkin was using you just as he used Mr. Burke. The box, the cork. It was all part of a much larger plan, one that has been unfolding right under your noses." I could see the gears turning in Thompson's mind, his realization dawning slowly. "So what now?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "What happens to us?" "Now, Mr. Thompson," Wolfe said with quiet authority, "you will have a choice. You can choose to align yourself with Larkin, face the consequences of your actions, and continue down the path you've been following, or you can turn on him, expose him, and try to salvage what's left of your reputation." Burke's eyes flicked nervously between Thompson and Wolfe. "And what about me?" he asked. "I'm just a muscle in all of this. I didn't know any of this was happening. I was just doing my job." Wolfe's gaze was unwavering. "You, Mr. Burke, are in no better position than Mr. Thompson. You've been part of the conspiracy, whether you realize it or not. You've been carrying out the orders without ever questioning the bigger picture. Now, you will answer for that. The silence that followed was thick with tension. No one spoke for a moment, the weight of Wolfe's words settling in. Burke's fists clenched, and Thompson's jaw tightened, but neither of them seemed willing to challenge Wolfe's authority. They knew, as well as I did, that there was no escaping the web Wolfe had spun. The game was over. I glanced at Wolfe, who was still calm, as though he had expected this moment all along. He was in complete control. The mastermind had been revealed, the players had been exposed, and now it was time to finish what had begun. Wolfe never wasted time once the truth was out in the open. He had them where he wanted them, and now it was just a matter of wrapping it all up. "The final question remains," Wolfe said, his voice measured. "Where is Larkin?" Burke shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting around the room as though looking for an escape. "I don't know," he muttered, his voice tense. "He's been keeping a low profile. I don't even know where he's hiding." Thompson, too, seemed lost. I haven't heard from him in days. He's disappeared, just like that. Vanished Wolfe's expression remained unchanged. "I'm afraid vanished is not an acceptable answer. Mr. Larkin has been playing you both from the beginning, and now he is slipping through your fingers. But he will not slip through mine." I could feel the shift in the air, the quiet anticipation of the final move. Wolfe had already made his decision. He was closing in on Larkin, and nothing would stop him now. "Well then," Wolfe said, finally breaking the silence, "we have one last task. Find Larkin, and when we do, I shall expose him for what he truly is. Nothing more than a shadow behind the curtain." I looked at Wolfe, sensing that the endgame was near. All the pieces were now in motion, and soon enough, Larkin would be in the open. There would be no more hiding, no more manipulation. Wolfe had already set the wheels in motion, and now, with a single move, everything would be revealed. But as Wolfe turned his gaze back to the two men in front of him, I couldn't shake the feeling that the true revelation was still to come. The cork, the box, the network, it had all been a precursor. The real game was just about to begin. The weight of Wolfe's words settled over the room like a thick fog. He was calm, deliberate, and unyielding in his assessment of the situation. But I could tell that beneath his composed exterior there was an underlying current of tension. The pieces were falling into place, and now the final act was drawing closer. Burke and Thompson exchanged uneasy glances, each of them caught in the realization that they were no longer in control. They had been led by the nose, manipulated by Larkin, and now they were left with nothing but the bitter taste of betrayal. Wolfe had them cornered, but the final move still hadn't been made. It wasn't just about exposing Larkin, it was about how he would do it, and when. "You're sure you have no idea where he is?" Wolfe asked, his voice smooth but laced with an edge. He was looking directly at Burke now, his gaze unflinching. Burke's jaw clenched, his hand tapping nervously on the table. "I swear to God, Wolfe, I don't know where he's hiding." "He's been careful. Too careful. I've been out of the loop for days. No calls, no messages. He's gone dark." Wolfe's eyes flicked over to Thompson, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "And you, Mr. Thompson?" Wolfe asked. "Do you have any information that could help us locate him?" Thompson hesitated, his mind working through the options, his face a mask of frustration. "I told you everything I knew. He never told me his real plans. He kept everything close to the chest, but He faltered, his expression tightening. "I don't think he'll stay hidden for long. Not with what's at stake." Wolfe leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he looked thoughtfully at the two men. "No, I imagine he won't. He's too invested in this to just vanish, and if Larkin is as clever as I suspect, he will have left a trail. Small, but significant." I could see it in Wolfe's eyes, the glint of determination. He wasn't done yet, and neither were we. The hunt for Larkin was about to shift gears. It wasn't just about finding him, it was about understanding how he operated, what he was hiding, and why he had been playing these men for so long. "Archie," Wolfe said, his voice pulling me back into focus. "I want you to revisit the scene at the archive. Go through the place again, methodically. There are details we missed before. Burke may have thought he was clever, but no one escapes my notice." I nodded, already reaching for my coat. "I'll head over right away." Saul, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke. "You want me to follow up on the network Larkin's been building? I can get in touch with a few people, see if anyone's seen anything unusual." Wolfe nodded, his eyes sharp. "Yes, get as much information as you can, and keep a low profile. We don't want to alert him too soon. He's already made a mistake by drawing us into this mess. We need to be one step ahead." I could feel the tension in the room tightening as Wolfe's plan took shape. This wasn't just about finding Larkin. It was about catching him before he had the chance to disappear completely. He would slip up, Wolfe was certain of it, and when he did, we would be there to make the final move. I headed for the door, my mind already racing through the possibilities. The archive had been a strange place, a quiet, hidden corner of the city that most people would overlook. But Wolfe had already shown that nothing was ever as it seemed. If Larkin was hiding in plain sight, he would leave a trail, and I would find it. The drive to the archive felt like it took longer than it should have, the streets blurring around me as I navigated through the city. My mind was filled with the images of the wine cellar, the box, the cork, all those small, seemingly insignificant details that Wolfe had pieced together into something far more dangerous. When I arrived at the archive, the building was as quiet as I remembered. I pushed through the entrance, the familiar musty scent of old books and aged wine hitting me immediately. The place seemed abandoned, but I wasn't fooled. If Larkin had been here recently, I'd find something, anything that could lead me to him. I made my way through the labyrinth of shelves, carefully checking every corner, every bottle. It didn't take long for me to spot it, a small, inconspicuous door at the far end of the cellar. I'd passed it earlier without giving it much thought, but now, in the silence of the room, it stood out. I approached it cautiously, my hand resting on the cold metal of the doorknob. It creaked as I turned it, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into a dimly lit basement. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of mildew clung to everything. My heart quickened as I descended, my footsteps muffled by the old wooden steps. The basement felt like a forgotten place, separate from the rest of the archive, hidden away and untouched. At the bottom, I found what I had been looking for, a table scattered with papers, maps, and a series of encrypted documents. This was it, the network Larkin had been building. I could almost hear Wolfe's voice in my head, telling me to be thorough, to look for the small details. I began to sift through the papers, my mind focused, my eyes scanning for any clue that would lead me to Larkin. And then I found it. A name, scrawled hastily across one of the documents. It was a place, a location in the city where Larkin had been meeting with his contacts. It was a lead. A small one, but a lead nonetheless. I quickly snapped a photo of the document and stuffed it into my pocket. This was the breakthrough we needed. Larkin was closer than ever, and with Wolfe's plan in motion, it was only a matter of time before we caught him. The hunt was nearly over. I didn't waste any time returning to the brownstone. The adrenaline from finding that document still pulsed through my veins as I hurried back, eager to share the breakthrough with Wolfe. The streets seemed to stretch on forever, each red light prolonging the anticipation of what we could finally do with this lead. But as I entered the brownstone, I saw Saul already there, his expression unreadable, pacing in front of Wolfe's study door. "What happened?" I asked, my voice tight with urgency. Saul stopped and turned to me. "I've got something," he said, his voice low. I was able to get a name. Someone connected to Larkin's network. I had to dig deep, but it's a start. The name's Gerald Kane, a known associate of Larkin's. Kane's been working with him on several deals over the years. I think he's the key Wolfe, who had been silently observing from his chair, glanced at us both. "Gerald Kane," he murmured. That name has surfaced before, though I hadn't realized the extent of his involvement. But now, we have two pieces to work with. I nodded, my mind racing. Larkin's been meeting with Kane, and I just found a location where he's been operating out of. Some abandoned warehouse near the docks. It's where the real business is happening, not just the cork and the box. That's where we need to go. Wolfe raised an eyebrow, his expression calculating. "You've done well, Archie. The warehouse is likely where Larkin will make his final move. It's a location out of the way, perfect for someone like him, hidden in plain sight. But we must proceed carefully. There is no margin for error." Now Saul and I exchanged a look, both of us understanding the gravity of the situation. The time for subtlety was over. We had no choice but to confront Larkin head-on, and I had a feeling Wolfe was already plotting his next move, one that would finally put an end to this tangled web of lies and manipulation. "Get prepared, both of you," Wolfe said, standing up with surprising speed for someone of his size. "We will pay, mister. Kane and Mr. Larkin a visit. It's time to bring this case to its conclusion." The three of us headed out, the night closing in around us as we made our way to the docks. The air was thick with the scent of salt water, the sound of waves crashing against the old piers barely audible over the hum of traffic. As we approached the warehouse, I could see that it was as derelict as I'd expected. Its windows dark and grimy, the structure itself leaning slightly to one side, as if ready to collapse at any moment. It had the perfect feel of a place that people like Larkin used, an abandoned shell that no one would suspect to hold anything of value. We parked a few blocks away and approached on foot, staying in the shadows, our movements cautious. The last thing we wanted was to walk into a trap. Wolfe led the way, his every step deliberate and measured. I could tell by the set of his shoulders that he was already planning the confrontation, his mind working through the possibilities and outcomes as we moved closer to the entrance. When we reached the warehouse, Wolfe motioned for Saul and me to stay back while he approached the door. He didn't knock. There was no need for theatrics. Instead, he simply turned the knob, and the door creaked open with surprising ease. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, the faint smell of oil and rust hanging in the air. The space was vast, filled with old crates and discarded materials, but there was a sense of organized chaos. This wasn't just a place of abandonment. It was a hidden operation, a hub of something much larger. Wolfe stepped inside first, his presence commanding the room even without a word. I followed, keeping my senses sharp, ready for anything. The silence was eerie, broken only by the faint creak of the building and the distant sound of water slapping against the docks outside. Then I heard it, a faint, shuffling sound from the far corner of the warehouse, followed by the unmistakable voice of Gerald Kane. "Well, well," Kane said, his tone dripping with smug amusement. "I was wondering when you'd show up. I knew Larkin couldn't keep this under wraps for much longer." Wolfe didn't flinch, didn't move. He simply stood there, his gaze unwavering. "Gerald Kane, I believe we've been expecting you." Kane stepped out of the shadows, a smirk playing at the edges of his lips. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you, Wolfe? But you're too late. Larkin's already made his move. You're just chasing ghosts now." "Hardly," Wolfe replied, his voice calm but forceful. "Larkin is the ghost, Mr. Kane. You are merely his pawn, and I don't chase ghosts. I bring them into the light." At those words, the tension in the air thickened, and the quiet of the warehouse seemed to grow even heavier. I could feel the danger escalating. like we were on the edge of something much larger than we had anticipated. But Wolfe was steady, his mind sharp and focused on the target in front of him. "You're right about one thing, though," Wolfe continued, his tone never wavering. "You've been hiding behind Larkin, just as he's been hiding behind you. But the game ends tonight." Kane's smirk faded, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Wolfe," he warned. "This is bigger than you think." Wolfe's lips curled into a knowing smile. "I've been in this business long enough to know exactly what I'm dealing with, Mr. Kane, and I assure you, you won't be getting away with it." The silence that followed was deafening, the calm before the storm. I could feel the tension in my chest, every muscle ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. We had him. The moment of truth had arrived. And then I heard a sound from behind us, a soft shuffle, the echo of footsteps in the distance. Larkin was here. And this time, there was no escape. The shuffle of footsteps grew louder, and I could feel the air in the warehouse tighten, charged with the weight of anticipation. My instincts screamed that this was it, the moment we'd been waiting for. Larkin was here, and with him, everything would finally fall into place. Wolfe remained as still as a statue, his eyes trained on Kane, as though he could sense what was coming before it even happened. I followed Wolfe's lead, staying alert, my hand instinctively brushing the grip of my gun. I didn't expect things to get violent, but in a place like this, surrounded by dangerous men and hidden agendas, you never really knew. Then, from the shadows at the far end of the warehouse, a figure stepped into the faint light. He was tall, his features sharp and angular, a face that seemed both familiar and distant. Larkin, his eyes swept the room, his gaze flicking from Wolfe to Saul to me, and finally landing on Kane. There was a brief moment of recognition, a silent acknowledgement between them before Larkin spoke, his voice smooth and confident, as though he had been expecting this confrontation all along. "Well, Wolfe," Larkin said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I had a feeling you'd be the one to show up. The rest of them? Not so much. But you were always too clever for your own good." Wolfe's expression didn't change, but I could see the faintest tightening of his jaw, a sign that Larkin's words weren't falling on deaf ears. "You've been careful, Mr. Larkin," Wolfe said evenly, "but not careful enough. You've played your hand. It's time to see the whole deck." Larkin chuckled, a low, almost mocking sound that echoed through the warehouse. "You think you've won, don't you? You think you've pieced everything together, that you're the one who's figured it all out. But let me tell you something, Wolfe. You've only seen part of the picture. The game has always been bigger than you." Wolfe didn't flinch, but I could see the shift in his eyes. "The game is over, Larkin. There's no more hiding behind your pawns. Kane is expendable, and you're out of moves." Larkin's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You think I'm out of moves? You don't understand, Wolfe. I've already won. It's all in motion, and nothing you do now will stop it." I took a step forward, my instincts on high alert, but Wolfe raised a hand to stop me. He wasn't finished yet, and when Wolfe was speaking, no one interrupted. "Your plans were always destined to fail," Wolfe said, his voice colder now, the sharpness of his intellect cutting through the tension in the room. "You overestimated your control, Larkin. The people you've been manipulating, they're not as loyal as you think." Larkin's smirk faltered slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. "You think they'll turn on me? You think they'll listen to you?" He shook his head, clearly dismissive. "They don't care about you. They care about what I can give them, what I've already given them." The air in the warehouse felt heavier now, the moment teetering on the edge of something that could explode in an instant. I could sense the quiet desperation in Larkin's voice, the underlying panic he was trying so hard to conceal. It was only a matter of time before his bravado cracked, and when it did, I knew Wolfe would strike. Wolfe took a slow step forward, his movements deliberate, measured. "What you gave them, mister, Larkin, was a false promise. You took their loyalty and turned it into a chain, but you forgot one thing. The moment those chains break, your empire crumbles." Larkin's expression shifted just slightly, but it was enough to reveal the doubt creeping into his mind. Wolfe had found the crack in his armor. "You've been careful, hiding behind the shadows, using your network to shield yourself. But now, Mr. Larkin, you're exposed. You're no longer the ghost you wanted to be, and when the people you've been deceiving realize the truth, they'll abandon you." For a brief moment, Larkin didn't speak. He seemed almost lost in thought, as though processing Wolfe's words, but the moment quickly passed, replaced by a dangerous glint in his eyes. He wasn't finished yet. "You underestimate me," Larkin spat. "You think I'm the one who's been hiding behind shadows? You've been living in your own little world, Wolfe, thinking you're the only one who sees through the darkness. But you've missed the most important detail." Before any of us could react, Larkin moved quickly, his hand darting into his coat pocket. I tensed, my hand instinctively reaching for my own weapon, but Wolfe was already ahead of me. He stepped forward, his hand raised, signaling for me to stay back. Larkin pulled out a small silver device from his pocket, holding it up in the air with a grin. "This, Wolfe, is the true power behind everything. It's not the cork, the box, or even the network you've been chasing. It's what's in my hands right now. The key to the real game." The device in Larkin's hand was a small, unassuming thing, but I could see the significance in his eyes. This wasn't a bluff. He wasn't just a man desperate to hold on to control. He was about to make a move that could change everything. Wolfe's gaze never wavered. "What is that, Larkin?" he asked calmly, his voice the very definition of controlled curiosity. Larkin's smile widened. "This, Wolfe, is the key to the city's secrets. I've been gathering information for years, manipulating the right people, controlling the flow of power, and now, with this—" He tapped the device lightly, his fingers caressing it almost lovingly. "I can make everything come crashing down, all your precious rules, your network of influence, all of it." For a moment, there was only silence. The weight of Larkin's words hung in the air, thick with the promise of something dangerous, something far more than we had expected. Wolfe didn't flinch, didn't react, but I could see the intensity in his eyes. This wasn't just another move on the chessboard. It was the final gambit. And this time, I wasn't sure how Wolfe would win. But I knew one thing for sure. Larkin had just exposed his final hand, and whatever came next, we would be ready. Now, with the pieces laid bare before us, the warehouse felt like a stage set for its final act. Larkin stood there, that smug grin on his face, holding the device that he claimed was the key to everything. But Wolfe wasn't rattled. Not by the threat, not by the implications, not even by Larkin's bravado. He was thinking, calculating as he always did. He never made a move without seeing the whole game laid out in front of him. I could feel the tension in the air as Larkin waited for some reaction, his eyes glittering with anticipation. He was sure he had the upper hand, but Wolfe was about to show him just how wrong he was. "I think you misunderstand, Mr. Larkin," Wolfe finally said, his voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "You believe that device is the key to your victory. But it isn't. What you hold in your hand is nothing more than a distraction." Larkin's eyes flickered with disbelief, his grip on the device tightening. "A distraction? You don't understand, Wolfe. This is the culmination of everything, every plan, every move, every person I've controlled. With this, I can tear apart everything you've worked for, bring down the people you've spent your life exposing. I will have control, and nothing will stop me." Wolfe shook his head slowly, almost as though he were explaining something to a child. You're wrong, mister. Larkin, it's not power that you've been after. It's the illusion of it. You've manipulated people, used them like chess pieces, thinking you could control everything. But the truth is, you've never had control. You've only been reacting to the moves of others. Larkin's face twisted in frustration. What are you talking about? This device. This is my master stroke. You're too late to stop it. Wolfe stepped forward, his movements deliberate. You've been so focused on your own game that you didn't realize the most important rule. The people you thought you controlled have been playing you too. Larkin's hand wavered for a moment, his smirk faltering. What are you saying? I'm saying, Wolfe said, his tone steady and commanding, that you've been working with the wrong people. This device, it was never going to give you the power you thought it would. The people who gave it to you were using you to get something else. For the first time, Larkin looked genuinely confused. His confidence was slipping, and the realization began to dawn on him, though he refused to accept it. You're lying, he snapped, his voice cracking with desperation. Wolfe's gaze never wavered. The real game was never about the device, Mr. Larkin. It was about who holds the pieces at the end. And I assure you, the one who thought they were manipulating you, thought they were using you, was your greatest enemy. Your so-called allies. They've been playing both sides. And now, you've fallen right into their trap. I could see it in Larkin's eyes. The flicker of doubt, the moment of realization. But it was too late. Wolfe had already won. I have no idea what you're talking about, Larkin muttered, his voice now shaky. Wolfe smiled faintly. No, you wouldn't. But you will. Because in the end, mister. Larkin, the people you've been working for, the ones you thought you were controlling, are already one step ahead of you. And when you finally realize who's been pulling your strings all along, you'll understand why I've always preferred to work alone. Larkin's face drained of color, his earlier bravado replaced by something far less sure. Panic. He looked at the device in his hand, as if suddenly unsure of its purpose, its meaning. The last vestige of his confidence crumbled, leaving him exposed. You can't, Larkin stammered, glancing from Wolfe to Saul to me, his mind racing. Wolfe took another step forward, his presence unwavering. It's over, Larkin. The people who are controlling you, they've already abandoned you. All that's left now is the fallout. In that moment, it was clear that Larkin understood the depth of his mistake. The game he thought he was playing had been orchestrated from the start by people far more cunning, more patient, and more strategic than he could ever have been. He had thought he was the one in control, but all along he had been nothing more than a pawn. Larkin's eyes darted to the door, and for a brief second it looked like he might try to make a break for it, but it was too late. The weight of his situation had sunk in, and all the bravado in the world couldn't change that. Wolfe's next words were a final, undeniable truth. You're finished, mister. Larkin, you've lost. For a long moment, Larkin stood there, defeated, the device still clutched in his hand, but its significance suddenly meaningless. He had been outplayed, and no amount of manipulation or scheming could change the fact that the game was over, and just like that, it was done. The tension in the warehouse lifted, replaced by an almost eerie calm. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place with quiet precision, and it was clear that Wolfe's intellect had not only exposed Larkin's lies, but had dismantled everything he had worked for. As we left the warehouse, the night air felt different. There was a sense of finality in it, the kind that only comes after a long, drawn-out battle of wits. Larkin's reign of deception had ended, and the truth had won. And as we walked back to the brownstone, Wolfe was silent for a while, his mind no doubt still processing the final threads of the case. I could tell that he was already thinking ahead, planning the next move in his ongoing game, the game that would never truly end. In the quiet of the night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Wolfe had done it again. He had uncovered the truth, exposed the lies, and brought justice to a world that often seemed more interested in deceit. And for me, that was enough. The case was over. But with Wolfe, I knew that there would always be another one waiting just around the corner. On 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 the corner.